Okay, we're live. It's MC1 Gamer bringing you, yes, another Age of Sigmar unlocking with a look at the dwarves today. Today I have on a special guest. You may know him as the real Q from Her Majesty's Secret Service, but everybody else knows him as Andy2d6 Andy, resident dwarf from across the ocean. Thank you for joining me in unlocking the dwarves from Age of Sigmar.
Hello there. It's an honor to be on. Well, it wasn't previously an A-list show. It was kind of floating around a solid B-, I think. But now that you've got me on, it is pushing up towards those A-list echelons, I think.
I don't think I'm moving that far up on the alphabet.
I don't know. Just wait till the views start rolling in when people see me on the thumbnail.
Oh, okay, yes. Well, between the two of us, I have a feeling that the thumbnail might include a lot of down thumbs.
You can see, by the way, that I haven't shaved in a few days because if you want to think like a dwarf, you must become a dwarf.
See, now I would be considered. They don't have gray beards. They have long beards, right?
You need some time commitment, don't you?
Yeah, a little bit.
Let's put some serious work in.
I can grow it. It just I'll look like Saint Nick. I got the belly.
Well, that's a good start.
But I do like staying married, and if I did grow a beard, I don't think I'd be married for much longer.
I don't think I'd make a very passable dwarf, to be honest.
No,
not nearly fat enough, and I could probably use some kind of shin reduction surgery if I wanted to be anywhere close to a dwarf.
Oh, you're a tall fellow. How tall are you, Dandy?
I'm 6'2", which is about a foot taller than the dwarf threshold, I think.
Oh man, I'm just a little taller than the Hobbit size. I'm 5 foot nothing. I'm about 5'6". So yeah, I probably come up to your shoulders. But I'm wide.
Stout.
Yeah, I got football shoulders and a beer belly.
Right. Are we prepared to sink our teeth into these dwarven war scrolls then?
We are. Now, for anybody who's caught some of this series, next week I'm looking to do a few of them. Taking a bit of a break. I've been banging these out, but I'm looking to do a few of these for next week's, probably like 2 or 3, just waiting for some confirmation. But really happy to do the dwarves because as powerful as the dwarves were in their new book, they did have some deficiencies, some of which were mobility. And I'm really interested to see what the take is on somebody who's actually played them, because I haven't played them. I have a real fledgling dwarf army. But I'm really interested to see your thoughts are in how they play, because magic is so much different also in Age of Sigmar, and they don't have the access to even that part of the phase. But what they do have access to, they're really strong with. I just hope that they can live up to the armor saves that we've come to know them having as kind of the counter. So let's go ahead and take a look and see what I'm going to move this a little bit off to the side here, and we'll open up that, and I'm going to go ahead and share. So you tell me when that's
my one overriding thought on the dwarves before we get into the individual scrolls is that pretty much everything has a purpose. There aren't any units that I've come across and I thought, well, that's useless, I'm never going to even consider taking that. Yeah. Everything looks reasonably tasty. Not that I've used everything in Age of Sigmar yet, but just at first glance, everything looks decent.
Yeah, well, before we even dive in, I mean, you're are there any units that you don't have that you haven't, or that notable units that you haven't used?
There are a couple of things I just don't own, like a flame cannon and a lot of the special characters. I think I own most other things. Yeah,
I've noticed that there are some units that are kind of, I guess they were considered redundant, so they kind of lost their uniqueness, like Rangers are now Quarrelers. So you lose a little bit of some of the benefits that you used to have with Rangers being scouty. Now they're just kind of lumped in with Quarrelers. I hope that isn't a little jab in the side.
I don't think so. I was never a huge Ranger player in the first place. All right. So where are we going to begin?
All right. Well, we'll begin at the beginning. Let me go ahead and scroll down here, and we're gonna we'll bypass some of the special characters. Let's start with the very first one that you want to start with, and that is
the The first one we come to that I'm interested in is Mr. Thoric Ironbrow.
Okay,
of course, the Anvil of Doom.
Absolutely. All right, let's do it.
So this took quite a considerable hit in the latest book that the dwarves actually got. Some would say it used to be overpowered before that, and then it became just not worth taking at all.
Yeah.
Because it was so expensive and just wasn't as potent anymore. It keeps the same flavor. The special rules, the different runes you can strike, they're virtually the same ability as they were before, which is a theme throughout most of the armies, I think. Watching some of your other war scroll analysis. And I really like it now. Because if you recall, before they released the new book in the last edition for the dwarves, the Anvil of Doom, if it failed to strike the rune correctly, there's a chance it could blow itself up.
Mm-hmm.
And then when they brought the new book in, they got rid of that, so it couldn't really blow itself up anymore, but its powers became much weaker as a result. And you had to cast the spells in a different manner. You're actually partaking in the magic phase a little bit. What they've done here, though, they've taken it kind of old school in that you're just rolling a dice, and if you get a 1, it's not struck the rune correctly, but anything else, and it does strike it.
Wait a second. Thoric Ironbrow, on a 1 out of 6 shots, he's all the times that he's working his anvil, and he's tripping on his hairy toes and misses and doesn't strike the rune properly.
Well, if he goes into battle for any period of time, then you will see him with seriously bandaged up thumbs by the end of it, because 1 in 6 times he just misses the rune altogether and just plows that hammer straight into his hand.
That's great. I see now that I would have to convert. I'd have to convert that model.
Also, a notable feature: his assistant Craggy, who was really just useless previously. He was just there for decoration. But if you get him now, then that means that you can strike 2 runes in the same turn.
Sweet.
They have to be different runes, though. You can't do the same one twice. So that is huge. That's a huge difference.
Nice.
Because each ability on its own is potent enough. Obviously, you've got the Rune of Hearth and Home. You can pick a unit that doesn't need to take battle shock tests. Oath and Steel, where the unit adds +1 to any save rolls, which, when we get to the particular units later on, we'll discuss which units that's going to benefit the most. And the Rune of Wrath and Ruin, which does D3 mortal wounds to an enemy unit, which is very, very useful indeed, especially for those units that have access to basically invulnerable armor saves of just 1+. So anything that does mortal wounds is always very tasty against them.
24 inches is not that bad. I mean, that's going to be about 2/3 of the table, really. You set them up in somewhere sort of in the middle in your deployment area. And,
it's pretty good, and it has a huge move rate of 1 inch per turn as well. So if they think about backing away,
that adds up. That adds up.
It does.
Can it charge? No,
unfortunately, it can't. No.
Good. That makes sense. I don't know. He's strapping up, putting his anvil on his back and running into battle and then repositioning it. That would be.
Yeah, the fact that he's so slow, though, means that his unbinding ability, which is quite potent because he adds 2 to his unbinding rolls, he's going to be quite far away most of the time. So nice. Yeah. It's not going to come up that much. I doubt you're going to be doing too much unbinding with him. The enemy aren't going to bring their wizards very close to him.
Yeah, and that actually brings up another question. And I know we're probably jumping ahead here, but I've gone through about half of these scrolls. I haven't gone through the whole thing. Is there any kind of innate unbinding or innate anti-magic for
there is.
Okay.
On some of the individual units, they have kind of an anti-magic built into them with certain banners you can take.
Okay, so we'll get to those. So anything more on these two guys before we actually move on? Because I mean, I love the anvil, and I could see right now that I would take it as long as the unique characters weren't removed from the play.
Well, 8 wounds, it's not going to be easy to take off, especially because it's not going to be getting too close to the enemy. And everything else regarding the anvil is pretty much synergistic. So when we get to those particular units, I'll be referring back to the anvil quite often, I think. Yeah,
not bad on his combat stats for Thoric, but it doesn't knock me out either. I mean, 3+3+ is pretty good. Couple of attacks, 4 attacks at 3+4 up. He's got a couple of rends, and 2 and 1 damage, not so bad. And his buddy Craggy, he's got some okay. He's got one attack. Okay, that'll add on, but that's not horrible. He's definitely gonna throw back if somebody ambushes or swoops around and tries to take him out.
He's not going to go down easy.
Yeah. I would imagine this would be a target for war machines, though. The long range war machines, certainly.
You would think, but then with the way it works now, if you're engaged in combat, you can still be using all these abilities in your hero phase. You can still be striking the runes while fighting.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Which is different. So is the enemy really going to get their fast unit around the side and put them into the anvil and risk just being there fighting it for the whole game while it's still striking all these runes, or is it going to go for something a little bit weaker that it can actually kill and affect?
Yeah. I mean, well, 4-up save is not crazy, and 8 wounds, some good couple cannon or rock thrower shots that could add up. It can happen, but you're going to have to devote some resources. It's not going to be a one shot deal. Definitely not.
Yeah, and even if they do take it off, that's the lofty total of 0 points they've just killed.
That's a whole other conversation. But I agree. I'm with you on that. I don't really care right now if I lose things. I mean, you might lose some synergies with certain items, but I don't look at it as a detriment either. I think that the whole non-points thing makes it – there's no tears shed if you lose something because everything on the table is killy.
If you take Craggy as well, he can also unbind a spell. But again, are you really going to be close enough to be unbinding too many spells? I would say probably not.
Yeah, he'd be a juicy target before I'd go after Thoric, just because he's got less wounds and that's one less unbinding,
and one less rune to strike per turn.
Yeah, I could see that. The only downside here is that it seems to be, and this is a little bit of a thorn in my side. There are still conventions from previous editions to Warhammer that people are bringing to the table in Age of Sigmar. I could do a whole video on that alone, and one of them is the first thing that people want to do when they want to change this game, because everybody wants to change the game. Everybody wants to put comp in. The first thing they want to do is say no unique characters, no special characters. And I kind of feel like Age of Sigmar, it just doesn't matter. Some of the special characters, everybody goes right for the superpowers like Nagash. And there are some crazy ones that it's not just Nagash. Everybody, Nagash is not the sum total of everything that is powerful in the game. He is pretty rough, but when it comes right down to it, I think the special characters in general really bring a lot of flavor to this game. And there's plenty of things down on the table that are just as killy, if not more killy, than most of the special characters.
And at the end, it does tell you to use the Thoric War Scroll if you want to use just a regular Runelord with an anvil.
Oh, well, there you go. You can't be locked out.
There you go.
I like that. All right, so let's go to our first unit, and if we have time, we'll come back to these other uniques. And why don't we start off with the Dwarf Lord?
Right then, are you going to take this one?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and take this one. I mean, the Dwarf Lord it previously had a lot of options, and you could really beef this guy up and make him very hard to hurt. Really, dish out some good damage. Of course, the big limitation was that he wasn't really going very far. You put him on shield bearers, or there was question whether or not that was worth the points. Now, who cares? If you like the theme of it and you like the statistics that you have by putting him on shield bearers, go for it, because now it's just a matter of options. One thing I like that's a theme throughout this army now is that they all seem to be a little bit more mobile. So they're not limited to 3 inches. They're all at 4 inches. So this is a big plus. They've actually increased not only 25% in terms of their movement capability, but there's more movement phases. So dwarves are much more mobile now. So
an extra inch makes all the difference.
Oh, an extra inch every turn. and my wife says the same thing, by the way. And then you have the extra mobile, you have maneuver phases, because you not only have your singular movement phase, but then you have charge and pile in. These dwarves are regular greyhounds now. So getting a Dwarf Lord that's going to be really tough and get him into combat, it's going to be a lot easier than it used to be. So I like the options that, it looks like you have to choose when you take a look at this description options. So you might have to choose whether or not you want a great runic weapon versus a rune weapon, and then get maybe the ancestral shield for a better armor save. I'm finding that in a lot of cases, the extra armor for rank and file troops really are an improvement. When I look at Grave Guard and Tomb Guard, for instance, I just think that you used to be the big thing was taking them with great weapons. Now it seems to be better to get the little extra armor save. So in a case like this, I don't know. I mean, I might be the key. That might be it. You're still getting 4 attacks with a rune weapon, 3 up, 3 up, -1, die 3. I'm pretty impressed with that. A great rune weapon, you get a static 3, an extra rend. You're getting 1 less attack. But you can always throw this guy up on the shield bearers, which I don't think is a bad thing at all. And then you get a couple extra runes. I have no problem with this.
It depends what you're coming up against and whether you think you're really going to need that extra rend and guaranteed multi-wounds.
So, well, like what situation would you pick each one?
Well, if you're coming up against something, let's say you're coming up against like demi-griffs or something like that. I imagine they have a really good save, a lot of wounds. Then you're probably going to want to have the extra rend and the guaranteed 3 damage per attack. If you come up against just your average rank and file infantry, there's no real reason that you're going to want rend -2, because most infantry in the game doesn't have a particularly amazing save. Even heavy infantry seems to have a worse save than it used to have in the previous edition.
Yeah.
Saves generally across the board aren't as good as they used to be without the extra buffs you can put on them. So I think shield bearers, I don't really see a downside to it. You're just giving him extra wounds and extra attacks, really.
And I like the model.
Yeah, it is a nice model.
So he's got kind of like the standard bearer ability where you can kind of be stationary and get a buff. But his is a stubborn oath keeper, where he kind of swears out at his troops, and they gain within 18 inches of him. It's all of his units, and they're called dispossessed. So I imagine all of the dwarves are considered dispossessed, which I guess is a label of anger that they have at their status from days of old. And everybody gets an extra bravery, which is pretty good. I mean, they should be pretty hardy and not ready to flee. I think a 7 across the board, or whatnot, is not such a bad thing. But moving that up to an 8, I'm game with that.
I think the only things that aren't dispossessed are the war machines.
Really?
The crew are dispossessed, though, just not the machine itself.
Okay, gotcha. Well, that makes sense. I mean, yeah. I mean, they're metal and wood. They're not alive. Although I guess some people are going to argue that point. All right. So if a command ability, if he wants to use this ability, it's 1 unit within 16 inches, and they can add 1 to their wound rolls for all their attacks. Now, I like that ability. I really do. I would. I don't know. I don't know what I prefer more, hit or wound. Maybe I prefer hit. But they get pretty good to hits, the dwarves, and I think that this ability is a nice one. The only thing that I have a problem with is that it's only 1, and if I had to choose between this and the standard stock command ability, I probably would go with the stock command ability, because you're going to find 1 unit that you're just going to get stuck in there, and you just don't want to lose extra bodies due to battle shock.
Well, there are going to be times this is going to be really, really handy, though. If the enemy has 1 really, really big unit, you'll put it on them, and then all your units that are attacking it, whether it's ranged or in combat, to get in that +1 to wound. So if you really want to focus fire on something, that's a good time to use it.
I read it right, but I misunderstood it in my mind. Yeah, I see that. It's not. I'm thinking that you pick 1 friendly unit for this ability, which was like, but I see exactly what you mean. If you're ganging up on one enemy, this is everybody's going to get it against them. I take that back. You're right. Thank goodness somebody here is able to understand what they're reading.
16-inch range as well. That seems about right. The Dwarf Lord, he's going to be getting up there, so he's going to be close enough to use it.
I like him. and I definitely would take him on those shield bearers. I mean, why not? Extra attacks, +2 wounds, easy. All right, Runelord, all yours.
Okay, so the Runelord, he is pretty much how you will remember him. He's going to be extra tasty at unbinding. He gets the +2 to his unbinding rolls, just like Thorek. He has the ability that, if you recall, with the last book, they brought in the ability for runesmiths and runelords to give armor piercing to the unit they were with. Mm-hmm. And they've got pretty much the same thing here, because he can put the rend characteristic of a unit up by 1.
Awesome.
Which is really, really tasty. And these things aren't actually command abilities either. So these can just be used. You don't have to do these at the expense of a command ability.
Yeah, that's phenomenal.
He's got the Ancestral Shield as well as the other rune that he can use, which is it basically gives people a 6-up ward save. That even works against mortal wounds as well. So that's handy. If you need to make something extra survivable, which when you combine it with some of the other stuff that we're going to come across as we go through, you can make really, really tough to crack units.
This seems to be the method that we really kind of didn't work in the old edition to kind of take the place of their loss in the magic phase. This is kind of their own special magic phase, but you don't have to roll to see if they work, and they can't be unbound.
His stats aren't too shabby either, really, are they? 5 wounds, that's pretty standard for the characters. D3 damage with the rune staff. Not to be sniffed at all. 4+ save. Bravery 7, so 1 less than the Dwarf Lord.
Yeah.
But still good enough.
As an individual character, he doesn't have to. He doesn't care. He doesn't care about that. Yeah.
Bravery isn't going to come up too much with him. I don't think there's too much more to be said on this guy, although he does have the pick unit that was in 24 inches of the Rune Lord. Is within 8 inches of Thoric Ironbrow. I haven't actually read this bit before. If the unit is within 8 of Thoric Ironbrow, then... Hold on, I need to read this properly. I just completely missed this paragraph previously.
Yeah, you select a power, roll a die. On a 1, the Rune Lord failed, nothing happens. On a 2 or more, the runes hammered into his allies' war gear glow white hot, and the runic magic and power takes effect. And I guess...
Oh, yes, that's it. If he's within 8 of Thoric Ironbrow, then his range is increased to 24 inches rather than 16. That's it. Oh,
sweet.
Yeah, that's the bit I was misreading.
That's sweet. Yeah, that's... Hey, 8 inches, that really matters.
The only thing I would say is if you're taking Thoric Ironbrow and a Rune Lord in the same army, keeping them close together just means that all your unbinding abilities are really far back and not close enough to the enemy, I think.
Yeah. Well, like you said, the Rune Lords, the Dwarf Lord's probably going to be moving up, but with Thoric is not going to be moving up that far. So yeah, I see what you're saying. You're not going to be if your enemy has a buffing type wizard sitting way back in the back of their deployment zone in their territory, you're going to have you're hard pressed to try and stop that guy.
Yeah, even if you move the anvil forward an inch each turn and move this guy so that he stays within 8 of it, then maybe at the end of the game you'll be close enough to start doing some unbinding, but not at the point where it really matters, I think.
Yeah. All right, I definitely would include this guy. Either way. Yeah, I mean, I like the abilities. I don't subscribe to the comp of 0 to 2 characters, heroes. I think that there's too much character in these armies and too much, synergy to inhibit that. And with that idea, I would at least have a Rune Lord and a Dwarf Lord included, as opposed, I mean, if not to having Thoric himself replace the top level. Good synergy here with the Rune Lord.
Yeah, but everything we've looked at so far, you could make a case for taking it, and I think that's going to continue throughout the entire War Scroll. I think everything has a place now.
Absolutely. And this is probably one of the few that I think. Well, there's a couple that I think really have increased their stock, and I think the Dragon Slayer has increased his stock. And one of the reasons why is because in Age of Sigmar, you're going to see many more monsters. As a matter of fact, you could deploy all monsters, and that's one of the things I really like. And it's like my son's army is, his ogre army. He just likes the monsters, and I have no problem with it. He's got 2, which is soon going to be 3 giants, 2 thunder tusks, 1 stone horn. That's before we get into any of the regular troops. That's a lot of meat. That's a lot of flesh. And how are you going to counter that? Well, things like Dragon Slayers. In every army there seems to be, or most armies, there seems to be a real major counter. If it's not another monster, it's something that's built to take down monsters. This Dragon Slayer is it. This is, and I saw it in your battle report with Remington. You used a Dragon Slayer, and these abilities are pretty impressive. First of all, you can re-roll 1s because of the runic axes, and let's not forget before we even go further into abilities, 6 attacks for the runic axes. You got double axes, 6 attacks. That's phenomenal. 3 up, 3 up, -1 Ren. That's going to add up. He doesn't have a great armor save, but should he? No. He's a Dragon Slayer. I don't know why they gave him Bravery 10. He's a single model. It doesn't really matter. I guess that might count against like scream attacks or attacks that measure against the bravery.
And units might come in the future that have abilities that force you to do something related to bravery. So
okay, great. And then the epic death blow. Before I even get to the epic death blow, if he makes attacks against any monsters, not just a dragon, but anything that's a monster, and there are some characters that are monsters, or if you're riding a monster, you're considered a monster. You inflict double damage. That's great. So you got 6 attacks, potentially 2 each, and if you use a great axe, die 3 times 2. Yeah, you're going to be doing some nice damage. You're getting +1 to mortal wound, to your wounding of rolls. You can make an extra attack if you're within range of Ungrim, which again, another special character, but we'll see if we can circle back and get back to him later. And that epic death blow is crazy. If he dies, you get to roll a die before he's removed. On a 4 or more, you get to inflict mortal wounds on your enemy, which is what is it? Die 6.
It's D3 unless they're a monster, in which case it's D6.
Oh, that's great. Oh, that's fantastic. So you get into an epic duel. And even if you go down and hopefully you've put some hurt on this monster unit, you get to potentially take him with you. That's great. How did your fight go between the Slayer and the Giant? Did he take out the Giant first?
Well, when I initially attacked with the Dragon Slayer, I made some really terrible rolls. So the Giant had the upper hand, and he eventually did kill the Slayer because I was forced to attack with something else in the combat phase first. So he got to go first in that combat. And he did kill the Slayer, but then with its death blow, it did 5 wounds onto the Giant.
Oh, that was a great way to go out. Great way to go out.
It's very characterful for Slayers as well, because that's the whole purpose of their existence.
That's great.
To seek a glorious death in combat.
See, now, I had mentioned this to you just as we were coming into the show before we went live. I was building a big dwarf army. I'm kind of regretting that I gave up a lot of that stuff now. And it was just with the uncertainty of where Ninth was going to go. I just don't want to have the excess models because there was a lot of new stuff. I wanted to have the currency to buy new things. So on one hand, I do regret it. On one hand, I don't. But I'm definitely looking to buy a small contingent of dwarves again. But I kept a bunch of stuff, and that was to flesh out my dwarven warband from Mordheim. And I have 2 Slayers. I'm really happy I have those guys now. And they're painted up too. So I can put them on the board, and I have a couple of Dragon Slayers. That's awesome. Dragon Slayers look like they've increased in stock.
Yeah, probably the most fun character, if not the most fun unit in general in the whole army.
Yeah. Oh, and I know a guy at the local club who has 100 Slayers.
Whoa, yeah, that's a lot of metal.
He hasn't jumped into AOS yet, but I've already told him he's got to try it. He's got to try it, but it's a lot of metal. All right, you got the Dwarf Engineer.
Okay, the Engineer. Now, a lot of his abilities don't appear on his scroll because they come up on the war machines, where it'll tell you if you have an Engineer within 2 inches or whatever, they gain this ability. So you don't generally see too much of what he can actually do on his own scroll. What you do see is that he can repair war machines, which is handy, although I found that maybe the crew will get killed before the machine does. So it's questionable how useful it is, but we'll see as time goes on. Mm-hmm. The one really notable thing, though, since all characters seem to be up to 5 wounds now, he's really survivable on his own. If he loses the machine that he's tending to, and he just charges out there, he's not going to go down without a fight. He may only have a small amount. Well, I suppose with his hammer and tools, he's got 4 attacks, which is pretty decent. But having that 5 wounds now, previously an Engineer charging into your unit, unless you were Ungor Raiders or something, you wouldn't be concerned about an Engineer. But with 5 wounds now, he's not a pushover at all.
Yeah. Yeah, he's got some range on his shooting. It's decent. He's even if he sticks back, anybody who tries to close in, he can snap a couple of shots off.
And he can still do all that while granting the benefit to the war machines he's next to.
Great.
It's not a trade-off.
Yeah, and so, I like that repair ability.
Yeah, it's handy. Although it depends if the crew dies before the machine, though.
Oh, really? So if the crew dies, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, because he can't repair the crew. he can just repair the actual machine. However, the crew can just stay slightly further back than the machine as long as they're within an inch of it. So you can kind of force the enemy to put the wounds onto the machine, which he could then repair.
Yeah, my initial thought about that was if you were getting closed by the enemy, putting the crew out. But I can see why you wouldn't. Just run the crew a little bit further away from the machine, and from between keeping the machine and the intruding enemy between you, and you could still use the machine, I guess. Yeah, unless there's a mechanic that says if there's an enemy close by, the war machine can't be used. That would be the way to go. And then, yeah.
So we're definitely going to refer back to this guy when we get to the war machines, because some of them get some get tastier benefits than others for him being nearby. So we'll get to that.
All right, Thane with a battle standard. Now, the main thing for a Thane with a battle standard, in my opinion, is getting up into closer to the action and then just planting where it's most advantageous, that standard, that battle standard, because you get some really nice abilities. And this is pretty consistent with battle standards in Age of Sigmar. You find a place where it's going to work, where the action is going to, the range is going to cover a good part of the board, wherever the major action is, and you kind of just plant your standard into the sand. In this guy's case, if he does that, he gains a couple of abilities. First, within 16 inches, nobody needs to take battle shock tests. That's huge. That's a 32 inch range across the board, a good section of the board. So you find some place in the middle and just plant. Hopefully, with a lot of guys around you that they can't get to you. Maybe with your what do you call it? The zombie box.
Yeah,
the zombie square. So in this case, maybe you'll have a little square or oval shape for the dwarves, or maybe some kind of runic shape to surround him. And then I like this one. You subtract 2 from any casting rolls for wizards from that are within 16 inches, and I think that's pretty cool. Now, if I'm reading this correctly, it says wizard from your army. So are Runelords considered wizards?
I don't think so.
Let's take a look. Runelord is not considered a wizard. So
no, so I'm not sure what's going on with that.
Yeah,
it could be a mistake, or it could be for when you're actually teaming up with wizards. But why would you want to reduce your own casting roll?
The way it reads is that it sounds to me like if you pick we haven't gone down this road yet. We're really kind of staying within the lanes with Age of Sigmar, trying to get comfortable and used to the army book war scrolls that we all have known. But there hasn't really been a lot of allying or discussion about allying in games I've seen. I'm probably one of the few people I know locally that have been doing it because I've been merging my undead with Tomb Kings and Vampire Counts. But what this says to me is that it's kind of got a mechanic that I haven't seen much yet, which is kind of saying if you bring in a wizard from, say, another of the order lists, that this guy gets an extra ability. But it kind of was weird to me because it says spell breaking.
Yeah, surely it'd be the rune of spell boosting if it was helping you out. So I think that must be a mistake.
Because you're not looking to roll. You're looking to roll high, not low. So I do think this might be a typo.
Either that, or bringing wizards along with the dwarves is so sacrilegious that they actually want it to have a negative effect.
But it's not negative. It's subtracting. Oh wait, you're looking to roll low, right? Aren't you? No, I'm wrong. You're looking to roll high. Maybe I just haven't had enough coffee.
It's either a debuff that you'll put on your allies as kind of a trade-off where you think, well, it's worth it if I've brought this wizard along with me, or it's a mistake.
Yeah, I just think the from your army is what threw me off. I don't think it's from the army. It says subtract 2 from any casting roll from a wizard from your army. That doesn't make any sense to me. I think it would be from the enemy's army. But you know what? People are going to stick to the rules as written for the time being. I know there's some people out there that are really looking for rules as intended. I've been trying to stick to rules as written. I think this is a mistake. I think this is a typo. But until otherwise noted, I guess I'm just going to have to stick to what it actually says. So wizards from your army are kind of screwed if you take any friends.
They certainly are.
All right. Hammers.
Right.
Go for it.
Hammerers. One of the few units whose save has been increased. It's gone to 4+. They only used to have a 5+ save.
That's big.
Yeah, 2 attacks each, 3+3+ with a rend. Very tasty indeed. Only 1 damage. But they don't need to take battle shock tests if they're within 16 inches of a dispossessed hero. So that's for pretty much any of the heroes. If they're within 16 inches, no battle shock. So that's kind of keeping the theme because they used to be stubborn, of course.
Nice.
They don't have too many ridiculous rules going on, but models in the unit may be standard bearers. If you fail a battle shock test, then you can halve the number of models that flee, which you're not going to be failing a lot of battle shock tests with them anyway. But if you do, it's going to mitigate it a little bit. The musician, this is a common one. The sound the advance rule. So if you want to run, then you can just run 4 inches instead of rolling.
Well, isn't it? It's not actually instead of rolling, is it? Instead of rolling the die 6, you know that you're going to get an above average 4 inches on top of your move. I got it. Okay.
Yeah. So if you really need to get somewhere, and the only thing that would let you down is like rolling a 1 or a 2, then you'll just go for this.
Right.
So I think obviously they've got some serious hitting power with 2 attacks each with the 3+3+ and the rend, because they don't just throw rend out willy-nilly, as it were, in this game. It's not obscenely common to get rend on a lot of units.
But rend adds up. A -1 rend with a large volume of attacks is just fine. That 2 attacks really is what makes that -1 rend hideous.
They still do the job they did before.
Yeah.
They're definitely your elite hitting unit in close combat, and they seem a bit more survivable than they used to be.
Yeah, and they needed that. They kind of did.
Yeah, their armor save wasn't really great before, was it?
So what do you think? Would you take those guys over, let's say, one of the other elite units?
It's a tough one, but I always have a soft spot for Ironbreakers, though.
Yeah, interesting.
So,
interesting use of word soft. I don't think soft and Ironbreakers do work in the same sentence, man.
They certainly don't.
All right. Well, I'll tell you what. Why don't you take the Ironbreakers and I'll take the Iron Drakes?
Right, Ironbreakers. Now, they have a lot of rules going on here. First of all, the first thing you'll notice is their save has gone from 3+ to 4+. So you think, wait a minute, that's not really great, is it? That's just kind of equalized them with the hammerers. But if you look, you'll then see that they've gained an attack, which is nice. So 2 attacks each. So that gives them a bit more of an elite feel. They don't have any rend, not quite as good at wounding as the hammerers, but they do have some really, really tasty abilities. First of all, their icon bearer. This is one of the juicy ones. If they're targeted by a spell on the roll of a 5 or 6, that spell just doesn't affect them.
I love it.
Yep, so that's how resistant they are to magic.
Not even unbinding, just immune. Ah, that's awesome.
Yep. So the spell can still affect other units if it was going to. It just, the effects of it will not touch the Ironbreakers 1 in 3 times. So that's really nice. They also have the ability to sound the advance. And I think most of the units have that for a musician, so that you can just move 4 inches instead of running. But you'll see why you probably wouldn't want to run in a minute. You can take the different weapon options, the Cinder Blast bombs. So they actually seem quite good, because once per game you can just throw them and that unit will just take D3 mortal wounds on a 2 or more. So you can take that on your Ironbeard, I think. Or you can take the pistols as well, which was an option that he gained when they released the new plastic box of Ironbreakers / Iron Drakes. But I think the most important things here, the Gromril shield and the Forge-proven Gromril armor. So I'll start with the Forge-proven Gromril armor. They ignore enemy rend unless it's 2 or better. And how common are rends of -2? Not very common, I would say.
Yeah, monsters, elites.
Yeah, by far the most common rend is -1. Even a lot of monsters only have -1 rend.
That's great.
Yeah, the ability to ignore that is huge. And when you combine that with Gromril shields, so instead of running or charging, they can form a shield wall and they'll get to re-roll all their failed saves.
Nice.
So this is why I was saying we're going to refer back to the Anvil, because if you put that 1 extra point of armor on a unit. If you put that on the Ironbreakers, they're on a re-rollable 3-up save that ignores any rend of -1. So if you pick the right opponent for them, that makes them virtually indestructible. Especially if you put them on a piece of terrain as well and give them cover.
That's the key. Yes. I've been noticing in some of my games that the smaller units, not the units where somebody's taking 40 or more, are getting a much more. It's much more beneficial for them in if you're like in that 20 range or so, because you can situate that army much more easily on one terrain piece, and it could just be a hill. It doesn't have to be a hill with crags and rocks jutting out. It's a terrain piece. All you have to do is be fully on the terrain piece, and you suspend a little disbelief. You get that armor, that boost to your save. That is pretty key.
So really, when you're re-rolling that save, which can be boosted up by those various things we mentioned, really the enemy, their only choice is to just put mortal wounds on you. And then if you have a Runelord and you give them effectively a 6-up ward save,
right,
you can really stack up all these different benefits onto a single unit. And I think this is probably the unit you would want to do it on. The situational, obviously, if there's a unit that's in some kind of imminent peril, then you'd want to buff them up. But I think building a strategy around buffing up a nice block of Ironbreakers could be very, very tasty.
Yeah, they're very sturdy, and I can see why you'd want to make them even more so. They could just be, I mentioned this with a previous unit in another, the Phoenix Guard, I think it was, that your enemy is basically going to be breaking against that unit, and they're just going to stand there and take it. And the Ironbreakers are no different, man. They really have the ability to survive. I love these guys before, and I don't love them any less now.
Yeah. By the way, which models do you prefer? Do you prefer the old metal Ironbreakers or the new plastic ones?
I didn't. I like the new metal one. I mean, I like the new plastic ones. The old metal ones have a real interesting character. The plastic ones, I just kind of like the not just the beefiness, but I do like the look of the faceplate with the kind of metal outline of their beard. I'm not partial to the ones where they have the beards that are coming out of it. I like it where they kind of just look like they're encased in just this articulated armor.
Yeah, I was going to say, I really like using when people have used the Iron Drake helmets with the encased beards, when they put those on the Ironbreakers, they look a lot better. They look a lot less like the other releases, like the Longbeards and so on.
Yeah, it's a good distinguishing factor from the Longbeards. It just strikes me as very, just a little friggin' dwarven tank, encased in this great, fantastic looking armor. So yeah, I'm definitely partial. They're beefy. They're really, wide on that base. The plastic ones.
Yeah, if he's just sending out units on their own to do a job, then just that 4+ save might not be enough to do it. But when you are stacking up buffs on them, they're really one of the units you'll want to do it with, I would say.
There's a reason why these kits are the resale value. I mean, if the secondary market value is still solid, you're usually paying higher than whatever discount you might get. They're hard to find at any price other than close to their retail value. And then much the same could be said for Iron Drakes, which, by the way, my favorite unit in the game. My favorite, not in the game, in the army. I love the idea of these guys having. When I first saw them, I have to admit, I looked at that and I said, too shooty, too technological. But when I took a closer look, and they just had these like dragon-like little cannons, and the idea of them spewing out this fire really just it spoke to me. Especially the fact that they had this defense against flame in the previous edition, which was a nice bonus too.
Yeah, when you read the fluff about the Iron Drakes as well, with them fighting in the tunnels, you can imagine how terrifying that'd be if you were a rat or something, and you just see these huge armored walls coming towards you, just firing flames down the tunnel, and you've got nowhere to hide.
Yeah, but as much as I agree with you, in the end, the rats kind of won out on that one. I know.
Don't remind me.
I know. I'm with you. I can feel that pain. All right, so Iron Drakes. Let's take a look. This is the shooty cousin of the Ironbreakers, and the only thing that's just sad about buying one of these kits is that you have to choose between which one you want to build. So the idea with these guys, you're gonna have some really good shooting ability. It's not a tremendously long range. We're talking about a 16-inch range, but hey, they're gonna move. They're gonna move up there, and then they're gonna you've got a 4-inch move that's gonna add up. You're not dashing across the field, but you're gonna have a zone of control that your opponent is going to have to understand and see wherever these Iron Drakes are, because unless they can get into combat and do some damage, they do not want to be anywhere within 16 inches of these guys when they finish their move, or any combat within 16 inches of these guys.
There is a sweet spot. If you're within that area against Iron Drakes, you're just going to be toast. You have to either be further away than that or closer.
Okay, and that's where they get multiple attacks. Tell me.
Well, if you're within 3 inches of them, then they can't shoot twice. But if you are further than 3 inches away and they haven't moved, then they can shoot twice.
Yeah.
So if you get tied up in combat with, let's say, Ironbreakers 4 inches in front of the Iron Drakes, they are just going to toast you alive for breakfast. Being able to fire twice.
That's sick.
It is. You really have to go all in when you're going after the Iron Drakes. You can't just float around 12 inches away from them. Yeah, you either stay out their range or you pile right in there.
And look at the hit and wound for that Drake gun. It's 3 up, 3 up. That -1 rend is going to come into play. I don't care about the 1 damage. It doesn't need to be more. It's fine. It's really good.
They're hammerers with a 16-inch range.
That's crazy. Yes, you're right.
With a save that's just as good, but they also have the forge-proven Gromril armor. So they're ignoring a point of rend when it's just -1.
And they have the magic resistance ability because of their icon bearer.
Yeah.
Yeah, and now this wasn't such a big deal in the previous edition because it required points to take, but now you have the Trollhammer torpedo, and I kind of liked the model on this, but I never when I wasn't intending to model it, I was probably going to magnetize it and throw it on there as an option, but I don't think there's any way you don't take this. Because in Age of Sigmar, you now have you only get 1 shot per unit, which means it's probably good to take multiple small units of this just to get extra torpedoes, in my opinion. But you get one guy can have a torpedo, and it's a 20-inch range. It's got the extra rend, die 3 damage, but if it's a monster, it's die 6. Wow.
Yeah, so what kind of monster, if you take a unit of 10 Iron Drakes, what kind of monster is going to stand up to 18 Drake gunshots on 3+3+ with a -1 rend, and the Trollhammer torpedo, also 3+3+, but that'll do D6 damage to you with -2 rend?
And if you didn't move.
Yeah, that's if you don't move, you get all that. With just 10 Iron Drakes.
Yes, I'll take 40.
It does definitely stand out that they are just amazingly good.
Yeah.
But because there's no points, obviously, once your opponent sees how good they are and you've played a few games, then when you put down those 10 Iron Drakes, it's only going to be fair that the enemy put down something much more numerous than they are.
Bite your tongue, 10 or 20. I'm definitely gonna have at least 20 of these guys in 1 unit. I mean,
no reason not to.
Look, a lot. If you want to talk about comp, most of the comps I'm seeing put a cap on around 24, 25 wounds, which I think is a mistake. But there are some units that really deserve that. In that environment, you take what you want, what you have. If you have 20 of these guys, put them down. Granted, you might want to put them down as 2 different placements, but I'm going to have 20 of these easily.
A little side note, by the way, when people are putting those comps in, of how many models or how many wounds you can put in a unit. Units like zombies that have the rules where if they're within a couple of inches of another zombie unit, they merge together. Have they got anything in place to stop people doing that? No.
That's a mechanic that's part of the benefit of taking zombies. That it's how they get some. It's just a method by which they get their. You still have to deploy or summon more of them to kind of get the boost when they merge. So the merging is not you're not taking away the ability. And if somebody tries to comp some of these abilities off of these units, that's like, a whole factor of bullshit that I won't even get into.
It doesn't seem like a game you should be comping, really.
I don't think so. The only reason why I keep mentioning is because there's such an effort by a group of the community that is at least trying Age of Sigmar. They're trying to twist the game to be something more that they're familiar with, which is 8th edition. And also there's people that are competitive that like going to tournaments and they want to make it more competitive friendly. And it's not a competitive game. There's a whole other conversation. My feeling is that I want to address those people, try to appease them because they're at least giving the game a shot. And once maybe they get in and they get involved and play a little bit and they see that, yes, there's some crazy stuff that's going on, but there's capabilities everywhere to do crazy stuff. So why change the game? Don't neuter it. If you're going to neuter it, don't go crazy doing it. And one of the things I see is a lot of times they want to put a cap of wounds on warscrolls, the number of wounds that you can put in there, but that doesn't answer any questions. Not all wounds are created equal. But if you're going to do it, in most cases, they're going to do like 20 or 25, which I don't like either because there's some units that fully come into their own at the 30 mark. Why limit them? That's how those crappy old units compete with the elite units. But in any case, if you're going to do it, you might as well take advantage of it. Look, if I own 20 or 40 of these guys, that doesn't mean I'm putting 20 or 40 every time we play. We're going to be playing smaller games too. But I'd like to have the option of having 20 in a unit because I already see other crazy shooty units that there are a lot of them that are comparable to Iron Drakes or even better in some respects. Maybe they're not as armored up, but they can certainly do some crazy damage. Look at the Bretonnian bowmen. And they can wipe stuff out. They can wipe units right off the board, kill a monster in one turn. That's the case. So if you can do that with 30 of those dudes, why not have 20 Iron Drakes?
Yeah, one option we didn't really talk about was putting the Drake Fire pistol on the Iron Warden, which on its own doesn't look really amazing because it just has a shorter range than the gun, and it's not as good, honestly. But that does give you the Cinderblast bomb, which, as we discussed, any unit within 6 inches on a 2 or more, they're suffering D3 mortal wounds. So
I didn't read that. Oh man,
it can be extremely useful in certain situations. It's just the way you would use them, you might not ever want to get that close.
Yeah, but most of the time, if you're trying to take out these Iron Drakes, if you're not blasting them from really, really, really far away, you need to get up in their grill.
Yeah, I would because the Iron Drakes aren't particularly good in close combat. If you look 5+ to wound, it's not great. So I would really screen them with something else.
Yeah, I see.
Putting them behind Ironbreakers just seems like a winning combo to me.
Yeah, looks like I'm gonna have to pick up 4 boxes of these guys. I don't know when. I'm looking forward to painting them. That's all. I'm wishing I didn't sell off the ones I had. All right, Longbeards. I could definitely identify with these guys, even though I don't have my beard.
Well, you should be growing it right now.
No, I feel it growing right now.
It's just reading this page, kind of causing bristles of hair to just sprout forth.
We're going to come back. I'm going to have a fake beard on. I should have done that from the start. All right, Longbeards, take it away.
Right. These are one of the few units that have one of the silly rules, if you will, that all the armies seem to have. They have the old Grumblers rule, where if you complain about something in a suitably dwarvish manner, then you can get one of the following effects on them. You can either... I thought dwarfs were made of sterner stuff. So models from your army that flee within 8 inches on a 5 or more, they just stand firm, which that's okay. Who does this beardling think he is? Dispossessed heroes from your army within 8 inches of the unit can use their command abilities even if they are not your general, which sounds quite good. And goblins are weedier these days, so you can re-roll wounds of 1 for dispossessed models that are within 8 inches of this unit in the combat phase, which is also quite good. So I think the first one, not so much. I like the other 2, though. So if you're willing to grumble over the table with your enemy, then you're going to get one of these benefits. What do you think of those silly rules, by the way?
Here's my thinking. First of all, I don't subscribe to the theory, even though some numbskull at some show who is probably as low down on the totem pole in GW as you can be. He's probably, nothing against the GW sales reps, but they're not the authorities that are behind the scenes in the war room making the decisions on why they're building this stuff. They're out there, communicating to the public and trying to sell goods. And some guy said these rules were there. And I don't even know if this is a true rumor, but even if it was true that one of these guys said it, I don't buy it. So the rumor was, if you don't know yourself, or if anybody hasn't heard, was when this stuff first came out, they said this fellow said these rules are there because they're not serious. These armies aren't meant to be serious. They're meant to be almost like a detriment to the play, where it's the new units and new factions that are coming out are going to replace them. So these guys are all going to go away. And honestly, maybe these war scrolls are going to fade away as more new ones come in that might look cooler or have maybe slightly better abilities and kind of overshadow them. It's going to take a while for those releases to do it. It'll be a couple of years, in my opinion, before that is even possible to have happen, even with the most aggressive of a release schedule. But let's be honest, we're going to be playing with most of these war scrolls for quite some time. And there's no reason why we can't, even for, as long as until Age of Sigmar, second edition comes out or something like that. The bottom line here is this: if you really are twisted and upset and butthurt about these wacky rules, because apparently the Stormcast Eternals and the Goreblood guys from the Khorne don't have them. So there's a conspiracy theory is that because they don't have them, they're the serious war scrolls, and these are not. I think they don't have them because they were in the starter set. So that's the bottom line. But if you really don't like these rules, if you find them silly, if you find them bothersome in the midst of after doing them in every game that you play, you know what? Here's what you do. Agree with your opponent not to have to do the special, crazy, silly thing, but keep the abilities in there. You don't take the abilities out. You don't ignore the abilities, because then there's no reason to take some of these units. That's their ability. But if you don't want to do the song and dance, raise the cup, not look sternly in someone's eye, not laugh and smirk, or in this case grumble, which every Warhammer does. Even if you're not a dwarf player or a Duarden player, whatever you want to call yourself, you're still going to grumble. I grumble. Everybody grumbles. Just use the ability as it is, and you don't have to do your little shuffle and dance. That's how
even if you are doing the silly thing that's listed in the rule, I think as dwarves we've got it pretty easy. Just grumbling, like you said, that's not particularly outside the realm of what we would normally be doing anyway. It's not like you have to dance in your underwear down the street or anything to get a reroll.
And you don't have to do the Grecius thing. Like, what is that guy, the ogre guy, where you're kind of like you're bartering, giving up a figure or something like that.
Yeah, if you have to offer the opponent a bribe, and if they take it, then you control one of their units or something.
Look, as long as somebody's not picking up my unit and throwing it across the room, which that's a deal breaker in and of itself, I'm game with any of these silly things. I don't really care. It's fun. And if you don't want to do it, don't do it. I won't force anyone to do it on the other side of the table for me.
Right, so these Longbeards, they don't have the resistance to magic that some of the elite units had. They have the Gromril shield, so they can form that shield wall when they don't run or charge, like the Ironbreakers. But looking at all their stats, if you arm them with the basic axes and the shield, they're like slightly worse Ironbreakers. And if you arm them with great axes, they're like slightly worse hammerers. But you also get the old Grumblers' abilities. So depending what you use those abilities on and where you position them, then they can become just as potent as those two units. Just their basic stats are slightly lower because they have those extra abilities.
Yeah,
that's the main difference. And they're less magic resistant.
So let's take a look at those abilities, and then I'd like your opinion on whether or not with those abilities you would take them above those other units, as opposed to just taking those units.
Well, I think the first one, as dwarves, you're not expecting to be failing that many battle shock tests. You got decent bravery and they're pretty tough, so I wouldn't be too concerned about using that one. The second one affects dispossessed heroes, so it depends how many heroes you're taking in your army, right, and whether they have command abilities. If you want to take a few units that have command abilities, then this would be a good one to have, because the command abilities are usually very powerful, which is why you can only use one. So it depends on your army selection. And the last one, you can re-roll wound rolls of 1 for models. If you're going with an army where you're just going to pile forwards several different units in a big battle line, I can see that being very useful. And adding or re-roll wounds of 1, does that make up for their attacks being slightly worse than, let's say, hammerers with great axes? It depends how many units are benefiting from it, doesn't it?
Yeah.
If you have units on either flank of this unit that are being buffed up by that, then that would probably push them above hammerers in some ways. So I think it depends on the rest of your selection. It's very synergistic, as people like to say nowadays.
Yeah, well, it's probably one of the more overused terms, but very appropriate for Age of Sigmar. My feeling with Longbeards is, if you're playing a larger game, they're going to be the unit that you didn't pick at the smaller games that you'd want to take into a mid or large size game for those synergistic capabilities, for those kind of minor enhancements. But I just don't know if I would. I mean, they have some versatility. Maybe you want to change your role, throughout the game. That's nice. There's some flex there, but I might just go for the more simple sense and just say, if I want a hammer group to do that role, I want the hammer group, and if I want an Ironbreaker or an Iron Drake, I want them to do that role. I'll take them. These would be nice to have as like the third element of your infantry type troops, and then figure out what kind of unit you need.
Yeah, if it's not necessarily a case of either or, these guys or hammerers and Ironbreakers, if you took all 3 with these abilities, that would be very, very tasty.
Yeah.
But we'll find out how they stack up to the Warriors in a minute.
Yeah, I like the Warriors, but this is one of those units where the mechanic is kind of entices you to take more. And that's why I keep saying in every video, stop putting restrictions on caps on these units. And if you do, leave them some flexibility. And I'll get to the Warrior. Let me just finish that thought. If you really need to put some comp on there, some of the nicer comps that still allow for some range of flex. But if you wanted to run an organized event, for example, give people the ability to take maximum of, 8 to 10 or 10 to 12 warscrolls. And then if they have to make choices on taking bigger units than whatever your cap size is, maybe allow them to sacrifice one of those warscroll choices to take maybe 10 extra guys in a unit, or 15 extra guys in a unit if they're 25 is your max.
That sounds very reasonable.
Yeah, you have less choices in your overall that you're bringing to the battlefield, but you can get a slight boost to get some of these special abilities, because these special abilities are what equalize some of these units in their power or capability in comparison to some of the elites. Warriors would never stack up against, let's say, hammerers in 8th edition, in the same way as skeletons would never stack up against, model for model against, say, Graveguard in the Vampire Counts. And there's countless other examples of that, spearmen against swordmasters. But now you have a mechanic where you take more than 20 of them, or in some cases more than 30 or more. Now you have a boost, and that's where I want to go to, because some of this Hornblower and Standard-Bearer stuff is consistent throughout all these infantry units. But here is the Resolute and Defense ability. You can reroll failed wounds of 1. That's wonderful. That's in your opponent's combat phase. That's a little weird. You can instead reroll failed wounds for a Dwarf Warrior for a Dwarf Warrior unit if a unit has 20 or more models when it attacks in your opponent's combat phase. I don't know why that's in your opponent's combat phase necessarily, but hey, if you get charged before, I think more often than not, you're probably going to get charged as opposed to being charged. And you might want to put these guys up as a screening unit, take the blow, take the hit, maybe while you have,
you probably want to be charged because you've got that ability with the shield walls.
Right.
So if you don't run or charge in that turn, then you get your reroll saves. So
I'm kind of sad it's a 5-up save base. It's too bad, but I guess I understand they don't have the Gromrel armor. That certainly makes sense, but you do get the reroll. That's pretty good. And if it says here, if you fail a battle shock test, you have the numbers of models that you lose from the fling. That's okay. But yeah, the real thing about it is that Resolute in Defense. You want to have 20 or more, and you want to stick these guys up there and screen your other more vital units. They're decent. They're certainly nothing to laugh at, but they're going to take losses, and you want to be able to get those hits back. You want to get I think unit of 30 is going to be minimum if you take the Warriors to really maximize that capability.
Yeah, when you have an ability that kicks in when you have 20 or more models, you really want to have a few more than that, because otherwise the enemy will just chip away at them a little bit, and now suddenly they've lost a lot of their potency.
Yeah, I agree. I think that they're important as a screening unit, and just as that first wave of, that you take before you get your other units stuck in. So, any other thoughts on these guys?
Potentially one of the weaker choices, because with the Longbeards, even though their stats aren't as great as those other elite units, they have some other rules that can boost them up again. The Warriors don't seem to have those to the same degree, unless you take a really big unit of them. And then really you're just re-rolling failed wound rolls of 1, which isn't huge. Although, if you have the double-handed Dwarf Axe, which is to wound 3+, then that is a really good chance of causing wounds then. So if you combine it with that, but then if you're taking that one, then you're not going to be quite as survivable because you're not going to be re-rolling any of your saves. So you're going to be dropped below that level of 20 a lot sooner, I would say.
Yeah.
So it's a tough one. They have a role, I think. They don't stand out as must include at this point.
Yeah. I would take them, but yeah, it would be choices. It depends on the size of the game. Same as my feeling for the Longbeards. They'd probably be a third or fourth choice. Miners, take it away.
Yes. So, miners. They used to be amazing back when the Anvil of Doom meant that you could charge your units in the shooting phase, because then they would come onto the board and then just charge. Then they took away that ability with the last book. But they've kind of got it back now, because when they come onto the battlefield, they don't come on from the edge anymore. They just have to come up 9 inches away from an enemy unit. Enemies that are hiding behind their lines. They can be very, very handy. One thing I really hate this actually about the miners, the mining cart. All of us had mining carts, pretty much, didn't we? We've all had from the skull pass box, the little cart. Everyone's had at least 1 or 2 of those in their time. Literally a month after I get rid of my last mining cart, because I was confident it was never going to be useful again, they bring out rules for it.
I sold my mining cart too.
That is just terrible timing. They could have warned us that eventually they would be useful in the game.
GW warning us about anything?
It would have been nice to have a little heads up just before I got rid of it, but no.
So what's the use of the mining cart? I see that it has wounds. What's the main function of now having a mining cart?
Well, if they have a mining cart, then they can have blasting charges. And it can also carry a steam harpoon, which is quite handy. If you look at the stats for it there, the blasting charges, they're pretty much like, they're like the cinder blast bombs, but not quite as good, because they're not just doing mortal wounds. They have to actually roll. But still, rend -2, still pretty good. So you're gonna hit with it. You're gonna do some damage. The steam harpoon, it's just a one-off decent shooting attack. D3 damage. It's not bad at all. So it's worth having it if you haven't sold the model off already, because it was totally useless before. Again, they have the soundly advanced. They can do their extra run. But I would think maybe they're not going to be doing too much running, because you're probably going to be bringing them up with the underground advance and then trying to get a long charge with them. So that's not going to come up too much. They do have a choice of banners, though. They can have the runic or the clan banner, which are pretty much the same for the other units. They can either be resistant to magic, or they can halve the number of models that flee when they fail battle shock, which on bravery 6, you're probably not going to be losing more than 1 or 2 models from that. So I wouldn't say that one's a huge deal. I think making them resistant to magic is handy, because when these guys just sprout up behind the enemy, you can imagine everything's going to turn around and unleash on them, can't you? Because they're right in their face. So making them a bit resistant to magic, it's useful. The steam drill, that used to be really handy because you could re-roll for trying to come onto the battlefield, but obviously you're not doing that anymore. So it's just better in combat, D3 damage, and -3 rend, which you don't see very often at all, do you?
Yeah, nice.
Now, looking at the mule's bite, it has a rend of 1, not -1. 1.
I think that's no. In the case of the mule, it might not be, but I think it might be a typo.
Yeah, it hits on a 5, wounds on a 6, and then does it make your armor save better?
Apparently.
Is that a mechanic that's come up on any of the other scrolls?
I've seen it once before, and I've come to the conclusion that it is a typo. If you go to the Bretonnian book, all the horses are the same, and they're very similar to mounts in other armies. The statistics: 2 attacks, mediocre hits and wounds, 1 damage, and then there's no rend. But on one unit, I think it's the questing knights, it has a rend of not -1, but 1. It's the only one that has it, but it's the same exact charger as in the rest of the army. And it makes no sense to me that they're going to be weaker horses, more pathetic teeth. Maybe they're just not, the hygiene for those particular chargers are not as good as the rest of the Bretonnian chargers.
Well, when you're out on a quest finding grails and all that stuff, when do you have time to stop and brush your horse's teeth?
Well, feed it. You can feed it something that does it for them, I guess. I don't know. There's got to be something that is helps. Maybe somebody who is an equestrian aficionado might weigh in on the notes after this video goes live. I mean, finishes processing.
It's either got to be -1 or the mule's bite is intended to just be a joke, because 1 attack, 5 plus 6 plus, and then if it made your armor save 1 better as well,
it might be.
Those are astronomical odds that would ever do any damage.
I agree with you 100% because it's a mule. What I don't agree is with the charger in the Bretonnian army. Anybody who looks at that, when we did the unlocking, I did it with Anthony from the Sustainable Center, and we just noticed everything else was exactly the same. It's just in this case, there was a 1 there, and that didn't make any sense to us. It had to be a typo. It might not be a typo here. It's the only other time I've seen it.
So I can see a definite use for these guys, because you don't have a huge amount of mobility with dwarves. You do have a lot more than in previous Warhammer editions. They can certainly get out there much more easily. But the fact that you can just bring these guys up whenever you feel like, in any of your movement phases, it's something extra. If there are some enemy units that are hiding behind a huge wall of the zombies or peasants, for example, that you just jump in behind them. So with them and gyrocopters, you can really get about the table a bit, cover a lot of ground.
Yeah, I believe that these guys would be wizard hunting more than anything else, because you're just not going to be able to get unbinding characters further up as quickly. And you could always throw up a unit of miners and then charge those singular characters, even if they're being screened by another unit, but they're going to be hiding somewhere in the back.
Yeah, definitely a specialist unit.
Yeah.
There will be situations where it would just be completely useless to drop 10 miners next to the enemy with no support. But depending what you're coming up against, could be very useful. And the fact that you don't have to make your lists in advance, you would have the opportunity to see what you're coming up against and then decide whether you want to use miners or not.
Absolutely. That is a mechanic that people still are I think that people who have not really jumped into AOS are missing, but people who have tried AOS are starting to grasp. It's that, unfortunately, you got to bring more stuff to the game, but you're really deploying on the fly. And if you happen to see that your army is going to require something to be across the table much faster than your regular army is, you're not just going to stand back and shoot with your dwarves anymore. You need to have something like these miners with their mechanic to get in your opponent's face and maybe slow down their advance while you're shooting them with your ranged attacks, but also try to take out those wizards, because those wizards, I don't think anybody's gonna. This may not be true. I don't think there's few armies that can stand off and go war machine versus war machine with the dwarves. There are a few that could possibly stand in there and have a chance, but there's few of them. But there's a lot of armies that have wizards that could just sit back, maybe not even be offensive, and just buff, and you're out of range. You need a unit like this to bring that threat to that side of the table and keep your opponent honest.
Definitely a specialist unit.
Yeah.
Very situational, but they do have a use.
Okay, Quarrelers. Now, this is, these are your crossbowmen. They're a little bit average when it comes to your hit and your wounding. The key really here with these guys is they have an extra ability to re-roll any failed saves if they didn't move. Well, let's read this. If they can create a shield wall instead of running or charging, and if they do so, they re-roll all failed saves for the unit until its next movement phase. Basically, this works for both close combat and for shooting. I think it's going to mostly come into play for shooting, because you may move your quarrelers a little bit to get them within range to take some shots. That 20-inch range is good, but you may need to move them up, and it's nice that they can move and shoot. There's no limit that they can't move and shoot now with those crossbows. So you may push them up a 4. You're not going to run with them typically unless they're completely out of range and out of the fight. But now you have the situation where maybe you can add a little bit onto their save, which gives them a 4 up. And if they're sitting in terrain, now they're a 3 up. Not so bad at all. But here's where the main focus with them. They can shoot twice as long as there's nobody. If there's 20 or more of them, so you want to have at least 20, maybe a little bit more so you have some extras so you don't fall below the threshold. So 25 or 30 is probably the optimal number. And as long as nobody is within 3 inches, you get that second shot, which is very common in just about every army. There's a unit that can do that. I think that a unit of quarrelers standing behind enemy lines, just dropping bodies in your opponent's advancing units is going to be essential. So one of these guys will be essential, unless it's a very small army, in which case you're going to try and find maybe one unit of maybe the Iron Drakes to try and do somewhat double duty. You want to stand off of at least the Quarrelers or the Thunderers. I think you want to have one of these guys, one of these units.
Again, they have the usual choice of banners, don't they? So it depends what you come up against. If you find yourself up against just a big close combat Khorne Chaos army with no wizards, you'd probably give all these units the clan banner when you put them on table. You'd say, yep, they've got the clan banner, so they're not going to suffer as much from battle shock. And if you come up against something that's got a lot of wizards, you say, yep, they've all got the runic icon. So it's nice to have that option.
You can have both. The way it reads, and I know that some people have argued this point a little bit, but most I think have been and I don't necessarily like this mechanic, but apparently you could have, it says models in this unit may be standard bearers. It doesn't say how many. And the standard bearers can carry either a runic icon or a clan. You can have both.
Yeah, I suppose you can.
I mean, look, would that be one of those really simple, small comps that nobody would really bat an eyelash? The box usually comes with, one, maybe 2 of these banners. And in most cases, you could make 2 banners. You could just say, hey, 1 banner guy, 1 banner. Okay, no biggie.
Yeah, if someone said that, if someone said, okay, should we just play with 1 banner per unit, I wouldn't lose any sleep over that.
Me either. What I don't want to see, and I'm sure that somebody's going to do this, is the entire unit be standard bearers.
Yeah, you certainly could do that.
I don't know how you're going to do it with the 2-handed weapons and such, but yeah, I guess you could.
I'm not sure what benefit you'd get from having an entire unit of 30 with banners.
It'd be impressive to see, but it's very redundant.
Well, I'll say now, if my opponent wants to bring 30 banners, as long as they're all beautifully free-handed, I won't mind.
All right, there you go. Yeah, if you spent the money on the bits and painted them up and did a really nice job, have at it.
Just imagining a general looking out over the battlefield with all these hundreds of banners in a single unit. That would just get confusing, wouldn't it? When you're trying to direct your forces around.
It'd be like old, medieval Japan, where they had all the guys had these little flags to denote their units. They had them sticking out of their back, right up behind their collars.
Right then, so Slayers. They are pretty much like the Dragon Slayers, just mini versions. Obviously, they don't have as many attacks. They only have 1 wound each instead of 5. But they're rules that pretty much just have toned down versions of his rules. So they don't have to take battle shock tests if they can see an enemy monster, which is, well, I don't think they're going to be too worried about battle shock anyway, being bravery 10. But you would think they might lose a few models, only having a 6+ save and 1 wound each. So it's a nice little bonus to have. And if they're slain, then they have the death blow again, where on the roll of a 4 or more, they do 1 mortal wound, or they can add 1 to any wound rolls for a Slayer if the target has more than 1 wound, which is the same as the Dragon Slayer. So you want to send them into things that have multiple wounds. And they can make an extra attack if they're near Ungrim Iron Fist, so you can get a nice Slayer-themed army going with all these guys. They don't have the do a ton of wounds if they die against a monster rule, like the Dragon Slayer does.
Not even a toned-down version. That's too bad.
Yeah, they do still have the death blow, though. So it's just 1 mortal wound, but it is per model, though.
Ah.
So if a lot of these are dying in one phase, you could potentially be dishing out quite a few mortal wounds on the enemy. Say you lose 6 of these in one combat phase, on average you're going to be dishing out 3 mortal wounds back on the enemy, which is always nice. Anything that kind of punishes the enemy for killing you is always nice. It makes them think twice. There's a few units like that, like the Jabber Slithe with its blood that spills on you.
Oh, I love the Jabber Slithe. Yeah.
Do I really want to engage this in combat? And the answer is usually probably not, because it's just going to bleed all over you.
You may not have a choice, though.
Yeah, when it's something fast like that, you probably don't have a choice. With Slayers, you're more likely to be able to avoid them, but it's hard to avoid anything in Age of Sigmar with the movement and the run and the charge distances now.
Yeah, and I wish these guys had a little bit of an extra, mechanic to run further, because they're free of armor. They don't have the, just one more move would have made them so much more interesting to me, because they're going to get into combat faster. I know I see they have the sound, the advance, but they're unencumbered, and they already are losing out on their armor save. I would have liked to see a 5 move on them.
A 5 move, or even if they can see an enemy monster, then their move goes up to 5.
Yeah, there you go. That would have been very fluffy. I would have liked that.
It would, but sadly not. Even without that, they're still good, especially if you're taking Ungrim Iron Fist, leading the Slayers into battle.
Is Ungrim existing in the current timeline of Age of Sigmar?
I am not aware.
I don't think he is, but that's neither here nor there. It doesn't mean you can't field them. Is there a plastic kit of Slayers, or is it all the old metal?
It's old metal unless you go for the really nice Avatars of War Slayers.
And those plastic, I think those are metal too, right?
Those are plastic.
They are.
The only issue with the Avatars of War Slayers was that they were so big and bulky and dynamically posed that they didn't rank up, but that doesn't matter anymore.
Ah, there you go.
So get some of them, stick them on round bases, and they'll look really, really good.
That's a possibility.
Yeah, I can see a lot of people doing that now. Because the only reason I never got any was because of that issue with ranking them up.
Yeah.
So I might be tempted to go for some of those.
I might have to do that. I mean, the two special Slayers I have are Avatars of War Slayers. I just wanted something a little different. And although I like the plastic Slayer from GW, it just seemed like it was one pose, and I didn't kind of like him. He looked a little flimsy, leaping off of that rock, and I just didn't want him to break in the middle of battle. All right, Thunderers, very similar to the Quarrelers, and I think very similar in role, but 16-inch, a little bit limited in terms of the. Let's take a look. Let me take a look here. We got 20 inches on the Quarrelers, no rend. So this is kind of similar in terms of the trade-off that you were getting in the previous edition, where one may have been a little more effective in terms of range, the other one was a little more effective in terms of punching through armor. I think that's what we have here as well. You lose 4 inches on the range, but you get a rend, and a rend is key. So these are not your long-range attackers. They're definitely going to be close to the main units as you advance to try and get. Or maybe protecting war machines in some capacity, but they're not going to shoot all the way across the table. And the main key mechanic, just like with other units, is that if you have 20 or more, you get a bonus. You get a +1 to hit rolls, and that brings them to a 3+, which is nothing to laugh at. If you have 25, 20 or more of them, and I'd suggest again 25 or 30. You get that +1 to all hit rolls.
I do think that's weaker than the units that gain an extra shot if there are no enemies within 3 inches, though.
Oh, I agree. I would have preferred to see the extra shot, but I guess that just means it's longer load time. With that trade-off, I would have liked to have seen an extra Ren, but again, like you pointed out very eloquently, they don't just hand out Rens in Age of Sigmar. So let's see. The Dwarf Bucklers does help a little bit. They have a base 5-up save, so now they have an ability if they didn't charge or run, they can re-roll failed saves. That's nice.
If they're equipped with them, though. So if you're one of those people that did actually put shields on all your missile units previously, then yes.
Because they were points, right?
Yeah, they did cost a couple of points, but people would usually put them on the Quarrelers.
Yeah.
Because they were a bit tastier in combat, because you could put great weapons on them as well. The Quarrelers
all have big boxes. Go pull out all those dwarf shields and stick them on the back of your Thunderers. It doesn't hurt, I would take Quarrelers over Thunderers, though.
Yeah, looking at this, I think I probably would as well. I just can't think of too many situations where you would, because they fall squarely between the Quarrelers and the Iron Drakes, I think.
Mm.
So, and I think the Iron Drakes are so good, you'd always want to include them. And I think the Thunderers are like a watered down version of them. Yeah. It's kind of the position that the Longbeards fall into, of being kind of mini Hammerers or mini Ironbreakers, and just not quite as good.
All right, you get the first of the Dwarven Air Force.
Right, the gyrocopter. Now, the one thing that jumped out to me immediately with this, other than the fact it can move 14 inches, which is nice, there aren't any templates in Age of Sigmar, but it might as well have a template. Because when you're firing the gun, then it hits all enemy models in the unit that are within 6 inches. So it's practically the same as a template.
Huge.
So that isn't very, very nice. The Brimstone gun, it was pretty useless before. It seems to have got a bit better now. 3+3+, 3 attacks, a bit of rend, but because you're so fast, you can get close enough to the enemy to use the steam gun. So you can make 1 attack with it for each model that is within range. So if you charge the gyrocopter and you're in combat, then the next turn, or if someone charges it in the next turn, because you'll be so close, you'll be able to get a ton of models within 6 inches. Because if you're just moving near a unit, obviously there's going to be a little bit of range that you're missing out on, where there won't be any enemy models because you can't land right next to them. So you will have a bit of a dilemma. Do you fly out of combat because it's only got 4 wounds, or do you just stay there and steam the enemy? So that's an interesting one. I suppose it depends what you're coming up against. And it has the rend on it as well, so that's nice. It also has the bombs. Not quite as good as the gyro bombers bombs, but fly over the enemy unit and then you roll 2 dice, and every time you roll a 4+, they suffer a mortal wound.
And that's, you can only do that once, right? Once in the battle?
Once per battle, yeah. And they do it as a unit as well. So you can have more than 1 in a unit.
That's the biggest difference with the gyrocopters for me. I had 6 of them before I sold my Dwarven army cache, and before I built anything, I had given it up again during the doubt around 9th edition. I really wish I didn't, because I'd love to have just put 6 of these down as 1 unit, and just, it would have been wonderful to see the Dwarven Air Force, with the, Flight of the Valkyries in the background, just flying over units and dropping bombs, where before you only could take, realistically, you took only a few of them. There were some army lists where you could take 5 or 6, but people rarely did it. There's only a few people that did it, and it neutered you in some ways. In Age of Sigmar, it encourages you to take a whole flight of gyrocopters.
Now, there's been a lot of talk, particularly from us, about the different formations and the different shapes you can put your units in. If you have an enemy that, for some reason, has decided to create a huge circle with their unit, with a hole in the middle, and you land the gyrocopter in there and fire the steam gun, that's going to hit every single model in the unit. Or it's going to get that many attacks, basically. Because you can imagine it just parking there and just spinning around, steaming everyone, can't you?
You just got to make sure you're not within 3 inches of any of those enemies.
Yep, it has to be quite a big circle. It can be done.
That's exactly right. If somebody does like the zombie square like you, it's going to have to be a fairly big one, or a circle to try and protect a vital target. But if they do that, they're probably going to do it in a smart way such that the flyer couldn't jump down in the middle.
Yeah, if they're putting a model in the middle to protect, then that'll stop you being able to do it. But I'm sure there will be some formation. There will be a use to having just a really big formation that takes an awful lot of space and it kind of closes up at the back. I'm sure someone will do it.
Where I think it'll be possible is when you see the battle lines that are maybe staggered, like V or W type staggerings, to try and minimize when people charge the way you I really like that video. We've talked about it, but you put up a video about it that actually showed it. and it was also showing how removing models can kind of lead your opponent in particular directions that you want them to be, or even strand and units that have not yet gone in combat. And there are lots of methods to maximize your capabilities, but also in some ways, again, lead your opponent. In those cases, I can see with that 14-inch range, the gyrocopter. And by the way, you can run with flyer, so you could run and still use that, unless it says specifically it can't be used on a run. You could still run with the gyrocopter, get that extra die 6, fly over and behind those staggered lines of your opponent, and maybe you won't be inside of a circle, but that 6-inch range is still going to get a lot of those units, especially if it's in V formation.
Well, and people that have been saying, well, you can still use movement trays if you want and just pack all your models together. When they see a gyrocopter coming, that movement tray is coming straight off the table.
Really, it's a great point. Very good point. I'm one of those guys that tries to use the movement trays as much as possible. I have to agree. You can see that, yeah. Yep.
Is there anything else that's come up so far in any of the war scrolls that has that effect of being like a template?
Not in terms of damage. In terms of an effect, the Frost Phoenix has kind of an area of effect around it that inhibits enemies. I've seen more of that stuff. I haven't seen a template-like ability other than this. Not that I can remember. And I've gone through half the war scrolls on these unlockings.
Maybe it's because gyrocopters suffered for so many years with having to do partial hits when everyone else had moved on from that they're just paying them back now.
Yeah, I'm really liking the gyrocopters, and I'm probably going to like the gyrobomber even more, which was probably going to come up a little bit. I got to admit, I'm really kind of down in the fact that I ditched all my dwarves, and the only reason why I might not go and put an order in for dwarves the next time I'm looking to buy something is that I know that there's more units coming out, and I cannot tell you how excited I am about fiery dwarves riding on the fiery slayers riding on the back of lizards. I cannot tell you how much I'm looking and waiting for that. It doesn't fit in old Warhammer, but in Age of Sigmar, it's going to be like a glove.
Well, I suppose if you're a slayer and you're seeking a glorious death at the hands of some kind of monster, and there aren't any monsters around, you just jump off, start fighting your mount.
It doesn't hurt that you're like blazing in fire.
Well, it might hurt, but
not the dwarf. Unless they're like, they're the kind of guys who just douse themselves in flammable fluid and just lit themselves ablaze before they ran into the fight.
Well, someone who wants to sacrifice themselves to Sigmar.
Hell, you're a dwarf. You're not sacrificing yourself to Sigmar.
Yeah, but not necessarily a dwarf.
Oh, okay.
A priest or something like that, who sees all these Stormcast Eternals coming down. He's a little bit jealous. He wants to seek Sigmar's favor. Decides to set himself on fire.
Doesn't really hurt those guys. They just get recycled. Crunch all you want, we'll make more.
Yeah.
All right, so let's see. But the dispossessed, they've still got grudges. They've still got there's somewhere there's one book of grudges somewhere, and it's just there's more. There's amendments being put into it. they're sticking extra pieces of paper in. It's got to be an ancient relic of the dwarves carried over. All right, gyro bombers, a little slower. 12 inches, not such a big deal. And just to really highlight again for anybody watching, use retreat. These guys are just asking for retreating. All right? There's nothing here that says you cannot use these mechanics if you retreat. It just says if you fly over. These are the kinds of models, just like Hex Wraiths, just like the Flame and Frost Phoenix. They can just bounce around the battlefield and use their special abilities without having to worry about, if they have a shooting attack, you don't use the shooting attack if you run a retreat. But still, the ability you have with these, the innate ability, you can just bounce around and just add up just free attacks while getting away from combat. So, all right, you're a little bit slower on the move by 2 inches, no biggie. They've got a clatter gun with 20-inch range, pretty good. That's pretty impressive. That's a standoff bomber that you could just sit back and shoot. 4 attacks. All right, not bad. 4 up, 3 up, not bad, but a -1 rend. That's nothing to sneeze at. I don't think that's a problem at all.
It makes them a bit more versatile, definitely.
I like in both of these. I like the rotor blades. It's just the idea that the pilot is kind of leaning down with his with rotor blades to do some damage. Those should have been mortal wounds, though. But there should have been a detriment. Make it a mortal wound, but on a roll of like a 6 or 1 on your attack. You lose a prop and you have a chance to crash or something. All right, but that's wishful thinking. The Grudge Bearer bombs. A unit of Grudge Bearers can drop Grudge Buster, bombs as they fly over enemy units. To do so, pick an enemy unit that they flew over in the movement phase. Then roll a dice for each gyro bomber in the unit. And let me stress again, you can have a unit of these. So you can have 4, 5, 6 of these guys in a unit. Why not? I would totally get like 3 or 4 in a unit. I just love the idea. You could have your whole army could just be bombers and copters. I wish I could sell these. I think I had 4 or 5 copters and 2 bombers, and now I'm going to have to rebuild that. So then you roll a dice, and for each one in the unit, each time you roll 4 or more, the unit bomb suffers die 3 mortal wounds. That's killer. You could stand off with these guys 20 inches away, firing away with 3 or 4 of these at 4 attacks a pop. Not bad. And then if you do get, somebody does close in on you or even does engage you in combat, fly away, drop some bombs on 4 up for each one of them. You're doing die 3 mortal wounds as you're getting out of dodge. Gyro bombers have gotten much better.
This is going to change the way that enemies set up their army. If they see you with a squad of gyro bombers, they're not going to be presenting you with opportunities to fly over the top of them and land and stay 3 inches away from their units. They're going to be packing everything in such a way that it's going to be really difficult for you to do that. But by doing so, you've decided what kind of shape their army is going to be in. You've forced them to make changes to their battle plan just by having these bombers. Because if you deploy in a certain way that's suitable for the gyro bombers to just hop each turn over your units, if you have a couple of distinct lines that they can land between, they're going to be doing massive damage here. D3 mortal wounds. If you've got anything that's in any way valuable, monsters or anything like that these guys can just fly over and drop those mortal wounds on, that's going to be nasty.
Consider that you're going to screen these bombers too with enemies, with your rank and file troops, with your block formations or cluster formations, however you form them, with your your infantry, and then you sit these guys back about 10 inches. Once they get into combat, you're shooting, and then you could still just try to run past and over, the front rank of these guys, of who your front ranks are engaged in, and just drop those mortal wounds. Now, here's the thing that also is a standout. It doesn't say once per game.
Nope.
I mean, that's just phenomenal. They're asking for this. This unit is asking to just do this ability. And it doesn't prevent you from using the clatter gun unless you ran.
Yeah, when the enemy spreads out, these guys are going to be all over them.
Oh my God!
Like flies.
I don't know which one I want more, the bombers or the copters. It used to be an easy call in the last edition. It's not so much this time. All right, bolt throwers.
Tasty. Bolt throwers. Now these guys have taken a bit of a boost. They're pretty useless before, really. When you compare them to the war machines, there wasn't really an argument to be made for including them. Even with rune upgrades, they just weren't worth it. 38-inch range, that is quite considerable in Age of Sigmar. You don't see too many things with that kind of range.
Ouch. Yeah.
3+3+, rend -1, D3 damage, and if you've got all the crew alive, then it can fire twice. Or if you've got 2 alive, it can still fire twice. So that's not bad, depending on what you're going to be taking down. If you want to go after a monster or something, it's pretty useful. But even with the D3 damage now, in old editions, having D3 or D6 damage on a shot meant that you were wasting it if you were firing it at just 1 wound infantry, but that's not the case anymore.
Yep.
So it can still be useful firing at anything like that. And having the engineer there as well means that you can add +1 to the wound rolls when firing it. So that's the little benefit they get for having the engineer there. And they also have the penetrating shot rule, so that if you roll a 6 or more to wound, then it inflicts double damage with a rend of -3, which is not bad at all. Definite improvement for those. I could see myself taking one now with these rules, compared to before, where there was no scenario where I could envisage myself taking a bolt thrower. in 8th edition. Were you in the same boat?
You know, it always was the last choice below cannon and organ gun and grudge thrower, and then it was whether or not you wanted to take a flame cannon or a bolt thrower. I rarely saw a bolt thrower. I think I maybe even saw one at maybe an organized event.
It was a shame. The old one, that looks like it's made of wood, not the kind of weird stone and metal one. The old one looks nice.
I got to say that there's a lot of things in Age of Sigmar, not a ton, but there's a lot of things in Age of Sigmar I think where there were some missed opportunities in terms of, you know, they could have done a little bit of a better job on some of them. I don't want to nitpick on those too much. I do think that there was an effort, whether it was economical in their motivation or otherwise, to take some units that were, maybe they just weren't selling well, but who knows, maybe somebody in GW had their ear to the ground and heard some of the grumblings or some of the feelings out there about certain units, and they made a very serious effort to take some of those units and make them more attractive in the current rules set, to make them more likely to see the table. And, you know, some of the core units in almost every army I've seen so far have been that way. This is another example of one of those, same thing with the bomber, where it might have been just a secondary, third, tertiary, or worst choice. And now you really have to take a look and see, maybe I'll put this on the table. It's worthwhile.
Yep, definitely not to be sniffed at all now, the bolt thrower.
And the dwarf cannon, always a guaranteed auto include in the army. Let's take a look at just how crazy the dwarf cannon is now. Let's first off, 32 inches, not quite as far as the bolt thrower, which, by the way, I like. I like that there's that little nuance. I think that you can build, you know, look, modern technology is different, but, you know, medieval, I think that cannons, you know, you're going to need a bigger cannon to go a longer distance. You know, this 32 inches just having to give up, that's still a hell of a distance. Numbers of attacks based on the numbers of models. You're getting multiple attacks now. It's really just a matter of, do you get 2 shots or 1? And whether or not you can take some of the crew off through counter battery shots, through maybe ambushing guys, or anybody who's like deep struck into or summoning that may have just charged in or shot from, you know, in the backfield or from a flank position to try and thin out some of the crew members so that you go down from that 2 shot to a 1. And that, you know, otherwise you're getting 2 shots. You're certainly starting off the game with that. 4 up to hit, you know, that's not so great, but you do get 2 shots. 2 up to wound. Oh my God. All right. Yes. It pretty much was that before. A 2 up to wound. -2 rend is not so great, but when you consider, I mean, for a cannon, I'm saying, obviously, you know, you still are going to get a save in many situations. There's a lot of 4-up saves in the game, so you're still going to get a 6 to save against the cannon. I have no problem with that. Die 6 wounds, absolutely phenomenal. But let's look even further down here. All right.
We're not used to anything getting a save against a cannon, that's the thing.
Exactly. But, you know, that's fine. You know, there is those rare chances. You're getting a 2 up to wound. You know, if I'm giving somebody a 6-up save is not so bad. You know, I can live with it. But die 6 wounds is gonna equalize it. All right, explosive shells. You can reroll damage inflicted by the cannon if the target unit has 10 or more models. Look, I'm going to probably be targeting the cannon against characters, against monsters, against enemy war machines. Absolutely, with that range, that is what I'm going to be doing. But it is nice to say that if I'm going to target maybe it's the way to just clean off a unit off the battlefield. It could be a unit that regenerates, like a skeleton unit that has, you know, or a Tomb King unit or a Vampire Count unit that can restore lost units because of their banners. And you're just down to just a few of them, and you just want to wipe them off the battlefield so they don't keep coming back. You know, that could be an element there. Could be to inflict some, you know, boosts to a potential battle shock before you get into, you know, you can start the combat rounds. Yeah, I can totally see doing that as well. But most of the time, I'm probably going to go after high-value individual units.
It's a nice little something they've just thrown in there, just to say, you know, this isn't just a laser-guided character and monster sniper. If you want to take out infantry or cavalry with it as well, go for it.
I'm a little surprised there's no minimum range. A lot of war machines have a minimum of like 6. This doesn't. So I guess that's where the what is it called again? What shot?
Grape shot.
Grape shot. Thank you. I have had my coffee, but apparently I'm still not awake. The grape shot. So that's considered what the grape shot is. But you mentioned the engineer, and there's the rune of accuracy listed below. So tell us about how an engineer makes the dwarf cannon that much better.
Well, you can re-roll failed to hit with an engineer, which is the one you are going to be failing when you're wounding on 2+. So that is a really huge boost. So instead of missing 50% of your shots, you're going to be re-rolling and then actually hitting with half of those. Sweet. So engineer is a huge boost next to the cannon. And the fact that he is within, you have to put him within 1 inch of a war machine, or 1 inch. That doesn't mean he has to be within 1 inch of just a single war machine.
Right.
So he can kind of spread his influence between a few if they're all kind of piled up around him.
Which can be that could be that's the Achilles heel. If you've got you could be putting up these batteries of war machines, but that's going to just be choice for large charges. You're not just going to be focused on one war machine anymore. They're going to be able to get your entire battery with the whole pile-in roll. But hey, you're getting a benefit. You might as well take it.
Yeah, it's a better boost having an engineer there than it is for the bolt thrower, where you're just adding 1 to the wound rolls.
Yeah,
re-rolling to hit is far superior to that.
Absolutely, I'd rather have 2 cannons with an engineer between them. Absolutely. Okay, flame cannon. I liked the flame cannon before, but again, I've only fielded it once. So tell me what your thoughts are on the flame cannon.
Well, the flame cannon, I've never actually used one, but it's in terms of usefulness, it did bounce up and down over the years, depending what the particular rules were in the book. It was the main rule book flame cannon rules that it used for a while, for just kind of those kind of flamethrower weapons, and those changed with the rule book so that the army book kind of became a little bit outdated. So it was terrible for a while. Then it became amazing with the new book, and I would say right now it is really, really good. And when I tell you why, I think everyone will agree. So first of all, the range is what is affected by the amount of crew members. So if you've got 3 of them, then it's going to have 24-inch range, which is not bad at all for this game. And it does a flame burst. So you pick a unit within the range. It does D3 mortal wounds. After firing it, though, on the roll of 1, 2, or 3, the flames die. But on a 4 or more, then it does another D3 mortal wounds. So that is pretty awesome. And when you have the engineer next to it, with the rune of burning, instead of doing D3, it does D6 mortal wounds.
Oh, God.
So imagine that, an engineer between this and a regular cannon, a unit within 24 inches taking D6 mortal wounds, and then on a 4+, it does another D6 mortal wounds.
Oh, that's the way to go. A little versatility, yeah.
That is just awesome.
Yeah.
When I was reading through here, that was one of the things that immediately jumped out at me. It was Iron Drakes and the Flame Cannon. Like, oh my God, how can you possibly go wrong with that?
Oh God.
I don't own one though.
My wallet's gonna cry. I just got the forest, the Guardians of the Deepwood box set and a bunch of terrain, and now I have my eye all over these dwarves, man. Next month's gonna be hard. I don't know.
There's no way you can possibly fail, I would say, with that flame cannon, because you're having to do so little rolling. There's so few opportunities to fail.
Wow.
It's just if that unit is within range, you just get this many wounds.
Yeah, it reminds me of the Thunder Tusk. It almost felt like cheating with the Thunder Tusk. My son. This is how I found out about this. My son was. I did a test game with my son. I haven't aired it yet because I haven't cut it. I forgot all the pictures. And he had his bulls and his Thunder Tusk against I had 3 units, modest units of vampire count stuff. And he opens up with a shot with that icy breath. 2 up to wound, 6 mortal wounds. Not rolling, 6 mortal wounds. It felt 18-inch range, but it felt wrong. And you know what? That's just the way it works. You're taking 6 mortal wounds. You better wound that guy. That's how I think about this flame cannon. It's not quite as crazy devastating because it's die 6, but still.
Potentially more, though.
Yeah, potentially more because of the blaze. Wow. Yes. I say yes. I'll take at least 1. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm probably going to have to buy one at some point now.
All right, the organ gun. Other than maybe the cannon, probably the most overused war machine of the dwarves in the most recent edition. And we'll see. Is it going to be the same situation? We've got a 28-inch range, not so bad. Different type of attack model now. You're rolling a die 6 in terms of the numbers of attacks. 3 up to wound. You're to hit. It depends on how many of your crew are still alive. Not so bad at 3 up to start. -1 rend, 1 damage each. Now they've got a couple of interesting different mechanics that apply to this. So first of all, you can move like with all the other war machines. That's of course very important. Minor move before, but it could matter when it comes to whether or not somebody's within line of sight, maybe just ducking behind a building or a hill. So let's take a look at this organ fire ability. Here's how the mechanic works. So in the shooting phase, you load 1, 2, 3, or 4 of the barrels. You have to choose. If you load 2 or more, you roll a die, and if the result is equal to or greater than the number of loaded barrels, you make one barrage attack for each of the loaded barrels. Okay, that's a die 6 each, and then you roll separately, as it says. And if the result is less than the number of loaded barrels, the organ gun jams and has no shots. So I guess you're doing this one at a time. I guess there's a sweet spot here. So you got to decide. You're not going to do 4 all the time. You might do 3. So
and that sweet spot changes a little bit when the engineer is thrown into the mix as well.
Yes, because you can re-roll the die for the jam.
Yep.
That's not a small deal. So you might have a cluster of organ gun, cannon, war machine, and one little engineer is going to be really working for his pay that day, right in the middle.
He is, and I think the bolt thrower has been screwed over, as you might say, a little bit, because it's just general stats make it a good choice, but its engineer bonus is vastly inferior to all these others.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, it puts it down on
huge.
Yeah, it puts it down below the others just because of that. Otherwise, it had really good stats that are.
It does have a higher range, though. So,
well, maybe you stick that one out all the way off in the corner.
Yeah, they've given it something.
Yeah.
But this is still really tasty, though. But one thing about all these war machines, like monsters, the more damage you do to it, the more crew you take off, the less effective it's going to be. Looking at this, if you get it down to 1 crewman, it's only going to be hitting you on a 5+.
Right. Which I like. I like that diminishing result, as you wound stuff. Monsters and war machines, it really, really works. They're crazy tough, but put a few wounds on these guys, and you're gonna start. They'll become a little bit more reasonable. You got to spread out your tension in the early part of the game.
Yeah.
All right, grudge thrower. There was a way to use the grudge thrower in the previous edition that was almost guaranteed unless you misfired, which also you could help mitigate. Where you couldn't miss. You almost could not miss.
You certainly couldn't. And now, obviously, you don't have any of those ridiculous abilities anymore, but it's still pretty damn tasty. This is one that does have a minimum range of 8 inches, which makes sense with it being a catapult. And the to-hit roll is what's determined here by the number of crew. So again, that can diminish over time. Unlike the cannon that has a wound of 2+, this is 3+, a rend of -2 again, though, and 3 damage, not D anything, just 3. So that's quite tasty. And they can also shoot at units that aren't visible without any kind of negative effect, which is quite common in the catapult type units now, isn't it?
It's sweet. Yes, the skull the screaming skull, the trebuchet, they are all the what is it, the rock lava, all you don't need line of sight. Cannot hide that wizard behind the hill.
And it finally lives up to its name, the grudge thrower, because they're settling a grudge rule. You pick an enemy unit at the start of the game, and then you can re-roll failed hit and wound rolls for the grudge thrower against only that unit.
And there's no automatic fail on a 1 anymore.
So that is pretty awesome. Because usually there's going to be something that you'll think, yeah, I'm going to be shooting at that right at the start of the game, generally. And when the enemy finds out which of their units has somehow incurred the wrath of your grudge thrower, maybe that's going to affect what they do with that unit and where they move it to.
Wow.
It's going to be difficult if they want to get out of range of it, with it being 40 inches. So I think that could be quite terrifying. And having the engineer next to this one, then it can fire 2 rocks instead of 1 per turn, which again is incredibly awesome.
I think you're going to be taking 2 engineers and having 2 different batteries with these.
I think so. And then a bolt thrower just on its own somewhere.
Yeah, that's right. Right off in the corner, a little bolt thrower. The only downside is that these are all single models. So you're going to have a lot of deployment choices where in other armies, they might be done before you. So if you're planning on bringing, it's nice to have these in your box when you're deploying, but there might come a point where a lot of times dwarves were outnumbered because they were elite troops before. Now it's a situation where you have to worry about sudden death, and you have to worry about, am I going to get the first turn, because these are individual deployment models.
I think all the war machines are just such strong choices that you can really tailor whatever you're putting on the table around your opponent.
Yeah.
For example, if you see that the enemy are going to be coming towards you, the flame cannon, probably a really good choice. If you think they're probably going to be staying back, then maybe you want the extra range that a bolt thrower might bring and the grudge thrower. So not having to make your list in advance is quite a big deal for these war machines.
Oh, I love that.
You might not be able to take all of them.
Yeah, you might have to make sacrifices, absolutely. But that's part of the allure of Age of Sigmar too. Deployment is filled with strategy and much more than the advanced list building before. Matching your opponent each turn, and then maybe having to change up your style or try to get really important things down before sudden death kicks in. Which, by the way, scenarios in the new hardcover books most of the time remove all regular rule book victory conditions. Sudden death is removed as well. That's a victory condition. People are forgetting that when they go into the scenario books. So that kind of
all about the scenarios.
I think that this game in general is all about it. All right, let's take a look at these formations. Formations have been uneven in some army. In some PDFs, I've seen formations that have been unbelievable, and in some it's like, okay, I really got to put down my entire army to get this. That's just a huge game, and Age of Sigmar doesn't always push you to do that. You can have smaller games, so you're not going to be using those formations very much more. And then there are some formations that are just better than others. So let's which one of these? I think, is there only 2?
Well, I'm going to tell you, I don't really like either of these formations.
Okay, well, pick one and tell me why.
Okay, I'll go with the first one, the Dispossessed Clan Throng. So first of all, you have to have quite a lot of units there, and 2 units of Dwarf Warriors, and you're going to want more than 20 in each of those to really get the maximum effectiveness, which is pretty much the same for the Quarrelers and the Thunderers as well. So you're going to need a lot of models in this army. So that's something immediately that I'm not a huge fan of, forcing you to take a lot of models. Yeah. And then the bonus you get for it, it's not that amazing. You can re-roll all to hit rolls of 1, which is okay. And then if you roll 1, 2, or 3 on your battle shock tests, then you just treat it as having passed it, which for dwarves, it's not a huge deal, battle shock, because they have good bravery, and a lot of their hero characters have abilities that will help you in that regard anyway. So I don't think that's too much of a bonus. So I don't think just being able to re-roll 1s to hit is worth having to take all those units that they're forcing on you there. I don't know what you think about that.
Yeah, if you're playing an especially large game and these were among your choices already, sure. But we're talking about, I wouldn't take 2 units of I wouldn't take a unit of Quarrelers and a unit of Thunderers, or 2 units of Quarrelers personally. I would probably take just 1. We don't have a core requirement in Age of Sigmar. You don't need to put these guys on the battlefield. I don't mind the unit of Hammers. I probably would have picked the instead of the Longbeards, I'd pick either the Iron Drakes or Ironbreakers. The 2 units of Dwarf Warriors also is kind of a deal breaker for me. I think it'd be a massive game where maybe you could include this within, your overall picks. But that would be a pretty big game, because then I'd be adding on to this with a lot of other stuff. I have to agree with you.
It would, and the second one as well. Yeah. I'm not entirely sold on, because the bonuses you're getting for it don't really seem like they're that huge. I mean, having to you take an engineer and then 3 war machines basically, and you can then re-roll your failed save rolls for the war machines, which don't have amazing saves in the first place. I mean, they're okay, and also they don't need to take battle shock tests, well within 1 inch of their war machine. Not going to be too concerned about battle shock with artillery anyway, though.
You're not getting a lot, but I got to say, you're probably going to field, in most cases with the dwarves, at bare minimum, you're probably going to fulfill this. You're probably going to have an engineer, a cannon, flame cannon, and either an order gunner or grudge thrower. More often than not, unless it's a really small game. You probably could qualify for this easily.
Yeah, in decent-sized games, you'll probably get this, and then the bonuses are okay.
Right.
But smallish games, I wouldn't go out my way to get these benefits.
I agree. And if it's a scenario type thing, or you're playing a string of games in an evening with a narrative, and you're using the triumphs, you're probably not going to have this in all of your games. Absolutely, I agree. So, it's a nice bonus if you're playing a mid to large size game. Great, but none of these reach out and scream, I've got to fulfill these. There are some that are ridiculous, like that avalanche in the what's it called, the ogres. It's just pathetically ridiculous. There's a few other ones too. I'm sure we can talk about. So overall thoughts about dwarves. Ideas on what you think. What do you think about the army? How do you think, since you've actually played them, and just in general about how they fit into Age of Sigmar?
Well, first of all, I'm going to say visually, I think the last batch of releases fit in really well with the new aesthetic for Age of Sigmar, definitely. So that tells me that probably a lot of our new units aren't going to be going away. They're probably going to be repackaged the same way the Wood Elf stuff has, the trees. So that's nice. So a lot of our models won't become obsolete. In terms of how they play in the game, we do have more mobility than we did before. But the fact that the ranged units, you don't want the enemy getting close to them, means that you may still be tempted to sit back a little bit. And your other units that have benefits if they don't run or charge. So they're kind of saying you can go up there if you want, but you're dwarves, so you probably should think about staying back a bit. That's the vibe I get from it. So you can play them in the same way you always have done. But because everything is more mobile now, and it's maybe going to be less of what people would consider a boring game, because things aren't just going to be slogging towards you really slowly, especially in the old book when you had the anvil that could slow down enemy troops as well and all these different things. So I think they're going to be more fun on balance, but you probably play them in a similar manner, I would say.
I look at it as, I think they're going to be more fun to play against, where a lot of times people say, I saw this time and again, even when I played them. And when I played them, I borrowed a friend's army, borrowed Anthony's army actually on a couple of occasions. He was good enough when he had it before he had sold that one off. And he buys and sells a lot of armies. So and I enjoyed playing them, but I saw when I watched other people playing, and when I had people just groan sometimes when they look at dwarves, because they figured it was just the same game over and over again. I've got to get to you. You're going to shoot me and whittle me down. And by the time I get there, and the race is to get to you. And I think that the fact that they're more mobile now means that they're going to be a much more interesting fight. They're not going to be as one-dimensional. Yes, they could still sit back, and there's going to be units that are going to sit back and be standoff. But I like the idea that they're not so neutered in the movement phase. They're actually profoundly more mobile than they used to be. Not as mobile as other armies, but they have much more mobility than before, especially if you take some of those gyrocopters, which I'm going to do.
Yeah, the only tournament I've attended, the look on people's faces when they see that they're up against dwarves, and if you've got more than one cannon sitting there on the tray, they kind of get, it's going to be one of those games.
Right.
That kind of look on their face. And I don't think they'll be justified in having that look anymore.
No.
Because it's just a totally different game now. And the fact that it'll be so scenario-driven, and there will be incentives for you to move around on the battlefield to get certain objectives or be within range of certain terrain pieces. And there's certain ways of people teleporting around the table or flying in from the heavens. So it's not going to be as easy to just sit and camp and have success that way.
Right, and you don't have to. You have units that can, the miners who can strike much more easily, and on the other side of the table, fast-moving copters and bombers, and your units are going to be able to get into the middle and even have potential to get to the other side of the board in the middle of the game. There's definitely an opportunity for that. I'm just very, very happy with what the dwarves look like. I cannot wait to see what new units come out for them either. Even just the one unit that is rumored. Now, I do have one request before we wrap up. And that is that, you have a buddy that I've seen put out some other videos, and I forget what his name is, but apparently he's a transplant from this side of the pond. I'd like to get some of his thoughts.
Oh, him, that guy.
Yeah, is he there? I mean,
the betrayed wargamer. I could go and get him. Hold on.
Sure, go.
Yeah, let me just turn the camera off a second. Stay
tuned, everyone. I'll go switch over to me. Yeah, I'll do some finger puppets while. So while we're waiting, yeah, I don't know which I'm going to look to get first: Ironbreakers and Iron Drakes, maybe the Iron Drakes, or maybe a series of copters in my next purchases within the Duarden field. But I might also wait and see what the next release is and try to group everything up, because I know that if rumor is true, we're definitely going to be seeing a lizard. Oh wait, here we go. So we have
MC. How you doing?
I'm doing fine.
Yeah, I heard you're trying to unlock Age of Sigmar. Is that true?
People would probably use different acronyms, but yeah, sure.
So in effect, you are opening up the game. Would that be a fair assessment of the situation?
I wouldn't put that much on my shoulders, but sure.
Because you know what happens when you open up a pile of garbage? You know what happens, MC?
Tell me.
Want me to tell you?
Tell me.
It stinks.
Wait a minute. Don't go away. I had questions. Viewer questions. People want to know where you come from. It's the greatest mystery of Warhammer right now. Well,
I don't know what you said to him, but he's just gone. He stormed out, ranting about something.
Well, next time you talk to him, we need to know where he comes from, because I'm getting little hints and flavors of Brooklyn, Boston, Philly. There's maybe this guy was a transplant, moved around different parts.
Yeah, I think he is quite well traveled. Well, he must be if he's visiting over here. He does get around.
Yeah, what's he doing over there?
No idea.
Spreading the culture.
Yeah, well, the thing is, I put out an invitation to him to come and visit me so I could kind of enlighten him on the benefits of allowing Sigmar's light to be shone into his life a little bit. But it's an uphill struggle, I'm telling you.
Is he the kind of guy that goes to an event and chucks batteries at the enemy on the other turn when your opponent's going?
He definitely seems to be one of those guys, yeah. You don't want to crush him in turn one. Let's put it that way.
I have a feeling he's a table flipper.
That's the impression I'm getting as well. I've given up a couple of sample sessions of Age of Sigmar. He hasn't seemed too thrilled with the rules just yet.
What gave that away?
It's just a vibe I'm picking up. I can read people quite well.
All right, Andy, we should wrap it up. We've gone, I think, over the 2-hour mark. Hey, thanks so much for doing this. You have a tremendous amount of creativity with your videos, great insight. It's very entertaining. And another, I do have one viewer question. People want to know, when are we going to see the famous Andy locks of the wavy hair that we've come to know from years on past? Are you going to be growing that out with the full body look?
Well, what usually happens is that it just grows and grows and grows until it hits eye level, and then I just cut it all off. So it's kind of cyclical.
All right. Well, we're looking forward to seeing that look again. I'm sure that I don't know how many of your viewers. I get 3.4% of my viewers are ladies.
It's about the same for me.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Because I'm sure Remington gets a double digits at least.
You would think, wouldn't you?
Yeah, I'm kind of bummed. His video and mine, we did Beastman, and it got corrupted with hundreds of other people from Sunday and Monday's live stream. So we're gonna have to do it again. But he's going to say he's going to do it again.
It was a good episode as well. I'm pretty sure he had to redo something similar when he and Reef did a video, and they had to do it all over again.
That stinks.
Back in the early days of Hangouts, when there were a lot more technical difficulties, shall we say?
Well, let's do another one of these. Maybe we can include in talking about some of the synergies with the dwarves and some of the other armies. We can, go and look at some of the special characters we missed. I'm glad we hit up a couple of them. But again, thank you so much for doing this. I appreciate you taking the time. And any last words before we sign off?
I would say that anyone who hasn't allowed Sigmar's light fully into their life, well, for a start, I don't know what you're doing this far into a video dedicated to Age of Sigmar.
Amen.
But if at all, if you're still on the fence at all, then really you just need to go pull back the curtains and allow that shimmering light of Sigmar to just overwhelm you and flow over your face and let it invade every pore of your body. And I think you'll be much happier for it.
I cannot follow up with anything on that. Thanks again, Andy, and everybody watching. Thank you for sticking around to this point. Have a great day.